This lecture is going to look at the successors of the Mayans, the Aztecs, as the final Mesoamerican civilization we'll look at, and then we'll go down to the South America after this. I do want to point out that we've talked about the Olmecs and the Mayans and now the Aztecs. There were other sort of I don't want to say nations, but cultures with other city states around Mexico as well. The Zapotec, the Toltec, etc. But we're just talking about the major ones in this class. And the Aztecs, as we can see here, lasted over 200 years and saw their fall with the entrance of Cortez and the Spanish conquest of Mesoamerica. And but in any case, we see its location here in the central part of Mexico, where where their reign was. Now, the capital of the city or of the Aztecs was Mexico City, and it was called Tenochtitlan then. And we see here on the left its location in Lake Texcoco. This lake is no longer there. It's been completely dried up, and Mexico City is smack dab on top of it. I finally had a chance to go to Mexico City a couple of years ago, and the major parts of Tenochtitlan are in the central area, and we see some portions that have been excavated. This is the Templo Mayor in the city, but it was built in this lake, and here we see a reconstruction of it with these causeways leading out to it. I guess we'd be looking from the west on this one. And there are various temples that are now outside the Mexico City. These ones on the right, but there are a bunch in the center, and the Great Temple in the center of the city was has been excavated, and we can see it's just its central location here. I do want to point out to we go back to looking at outside the city. We see this. We see these pyramids as well. I just want to show a reconstruction of it, where there was a series of pyramids, step pyramids with causeways up to it. Now, don't forget, these are not pyramids like the Egyptian ones that were used for burial, but they were religious centers, and they had temples on the top, not too dissimilar to what we saw in Mesopotamia. And we'll see that they use these temples for many things, one of which is religious sacrifices. But I did want to just point out the general trend that we've seen all along, and I've mentioned before, and that is when we see these sort of centralized powers emerge with big urban centers and social hierarchies, where some people on the top and some people on the bottom. Religion seems to play the significant role in that change, and the rulers and their religious status were inseparable. They were those concepts would not become distinct for them. Now, there are many, many deities amongst this society, but chief amongst them was Huitzilopochtli. We see here the god of rain, sun, etc. As the myth goes, he was born and would it's I have here born in full armor. He would be put on full armor immediately after birth, and attack his siblings who he were threatening his mother, and thereby becomes the major deity. It's interesting because it has some similarities to the Romulus and Remus story, and Romulus having to, sort of kill his way up to the top, family members, etc. But here we see the very complex uh, clothing of these deities. Notice he holds a serpent in his right hand, and the serpent, the feathered serpent, as we will see, is a very important concept for these for the society. Now, the major deity was, uh, or I should say, major deity was the serpent here of the precious feathers, Quetzalcoatl. And he is represented frequently in the artwork. His one of the major cities devoted to him was Teotihuacan, which we've talked about before, a couple hours outside of Mexico City itself. But we've moved on to a little later period. Although Teotihuacan was, occupied during the Aztec period, it was occupied for a long, long time by previous cultures, and we've discussed it already. But this, feathered serpent, which we've seen in iconography before, is shown here in a drawing. There is also, this another Aztec god here on the lower left and on the right. I'm not going to go through all these mythologies. There were very, very many. It's just significant to say that they were polytheistic. And we'll leave it at that. I just want to show you some nice artwork here that shows us on the left the eagle warrior, but it gives us an idea of how warriors would dress. And on the right, we see this Quetzalcoatl II, who was a leader in an Aztec leader who I'll talk a little bit about later on. I just want to point out, though, that we have the warrior classes now and kings, etc. And so we see these once again centralized societies, once brought together with religion, but also needing some muscle to keep it going. Now the creation myth is about a person who leaves the mythical land of Aztlan. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. Takes a boat from this island to the mainland and creates the Aztec empire. And he has to walk great distances and then conquer others. And perhaps this is some sort of metaphor for people leaving Tenochtitlan. Once again, Aztlan is not a real place; it's a mythical place. But we get the idea of the crossing of waters and the expansion and the spreading of the faith. This is a Codex Boturini, once again, one of the codices that is preserved for us. Keep in mind, when I talked about Landa in the last class, his destructions affected the Mayans, but the Aztecs have a lot more preserved for us. Now, the Montezuma, the Aztecs would come to a demise with Cortez. And you're probably familiar with Montezuma the second, the one who would basically lose the Aztec Empire. But to Cortez, I should point out though that he did so in the 16th century, the late 15th century when the New World was discovered. Other explorers had gone to Mexico. Cortez went there straight out to be wealthy. Just it was to plunder, and there was rumored cities of gold, and we'll see this idea replicated with the Incans, who indeed had a lot of gold, but also did the Aztecs, and they would give him many gifts. Cortez many gifts. Not even when they were fearful of him, when they just welcomed him as a guest. And he was met by Montezuma II, given a lot of gifts, invited to stay at his house, his palace, I guess. And after a month or two of staying there, ended up being a prisoner. A war resulted. We don't know all the details that happened, but Montezuma died at the end, and the Aztec Empire collapsed, and the Spanish would take over Mexico from that point forward. And we see this Tovar Codex here showing the coronation of the first Montezuma, just to show that they had been contacted prior to Montezuma II. And here he is standing in the center. We see his wonderful decorative clothing. He hasn't put his crown on yet. But I do want to point out behind him, to our left, between him and the pyramid, is a number once again, and that gives the date of this coronation. We talked about how the numerical system worked before, and you can see it used here. I also want to point out at the bottom of that pyramid, a small little box, but that thing is what's called a tzompantle, and we'll see that is where sacrificed humans have their skulls displayed. Now, he is, of course, shown outfigured compared to the pyramids and the tzompantle. He's much more important. We see this, what's in art history is called hierarchical scale. That he's the king, so he's the biggest, and so there, the more important you are, the bigger you are in artwork. This happens in artwork throughout the world, but indeed, he's so big here that he is shown well taller than the pyramid, and also it's hard to know. I mean, leaving the scale aside, hard to know all the details, how accurate they were, because this is a codex written by Europeans, and they look like even show him with a little mustache and goatee. Hard to know if that really happened or not, but in any case. Now, we know the date that they met, and Montezuma and Cortez met. It's recorded quite well for us. And Cortez had a translator with him, a woman from a slave woman from the Aztecs, who became his translator, and then eventually his liaison between the cultures, and his lover, and the mother of the first mestizos, which half Mexican, half indigenous, half Spanish. We can see her depicted on the left behind Cortez, talking to Montezuma, and shown here on the right. She is portrayed, depending on what your perspective, um, she is portrayed in different ways. A lot of the Mexicans think she betrayed them. She was or I should say the indigenous people, that she was betrayed by them. It's important to keep in mind that Montezuma gave her as one of 200 slaves when he presented many gifts to Cortez. And as I said, she would later become his wife. And here we can see him meeting Montezuma on the with her behind him in this writing. Um, the One of the emperors that would basically lose the empire to Cortez was this guy Cuauhtemoc, and this is a painting of him by a European. He had his what happened to him is he would have his feet held to the fire, quite literally. This is a very famous painting in Mexico City. And Cortez forced him basically to hand over all of his wealth, shown on the bottom left there, and eventually would lose the empire. Now, Cortez justified all of this stuff in the typical way, and that is that he was spreading his faith, in this case, Christianity. And therefore that allows for, any type of barbaric behavior. I trust I don't have to, explain that concept to everybody else. We've seen it far, far too often in history. But Cortez, known as Cortez the Killer, would bring an end to this pre-Columbian society. Pre-Columbian meaning before Columbus. But it was a very wealthy and rich society with several cities and a very sophisticated culture. I should point out once again that we have a lot of writing from this society because it was not wiped out as it was with the Mayans. Here we see a cosmological drawing of well, that is to say, the cosmology, how the universe is organized by the Aztecs. In the center is this, always these difficult names to pronounce, this Xiuhtecuhtli deity, and from him emerges the universe, and specifically these four sort of rectangular trapezoidal realms, bottom, top, right, and left, that represent different stages in the development of humans, and where we came from. It is the creation myth, and we can see it's we have the four Jaguar period. We can see the last 676 years, and then the four winds, and then the four rains, and then the four waters. They all last 676 or 364 or 320. We can also see here 312. And what's interesting about these numbers is that they're divisible by 52. And so this seems significant as far as most days of the week, etc. Well, I mean weeks of the year. Even though their year was not the same as our year, and I'll mention that in a moment. But they nevertheless, my point is that they set out a chronology for their origins, and it's not it's somewhat similar to what we see in ancient Greek Hesiod, where, there's these, age of gold, age of silver, but here they're named after the elements, right? Except for the jaguar. And so this is how they envisioned the beginning of everything. And those four trapezoids on the codex that I showed before, these are the four that are listed there. They also had another calendar. I mean, they had cosmological calendars. They had a few other calendars, but they also had just a straight-out chronological calendar, as I was discussing before, on this 52-year cycle. And it had 365 days, just like ours. Or I shouldn't say ours, what we got from the Egyptians. It was divided into 18 months with 20 days per month, and then 5 unlucky days. I do want to point out once again that the calendar we use is basically an Egyptian calendar. I haven't had time to discuss this, but we have the part of our calendar was based on the Roman calendar, like January, February, March. These are religious, based on religious deities, and but the Romans only had 10 months. They would, after they had dealt with the Egyptians, specifically Caesar having his romance with Cleopatra, would introduce the Egyptian calendar based on the sun. The Egyptians were great sun worshippers, and we would get our 365-day calendar. They would add 2 more months that they were named after 2 of the emperors, July and August. And different days for different months. But here we see them divided into 18 months of 20 days each. Now I want to show you also this plaque that was discovered not too long ago. 1978 was when I was starting college. And it shows the dismemberment of a female deity. And you can see her name down there, Koyo Shouki. And you can see her torso and breast in the center, but then her head is and her limbs have been cut off. And we do know that sacrifices did occur in the Aztec religion. We see these zompantles, which I'll discuss in a moment, like on the upper right. This is a sculpture replicating a skull rack that was used to hold the heads of those who were sacrificed. And they were indeed sacrificed on the top of these pyramids, where in this reconstruction we see 2 temples up there, and then they would be sacrificed and thrown down, the bodies thrown down the steps. And this was done for purposes of fertility of the land, as is unfortunately true throughout the world. We always think that in order to get a good crop, we have to kill somebody and sacrifice them to the gods. Most people sacrificed animals. Most civilizations sacrificed animals, but some make it to the level of humans. And don't forget that we sacrificed our God, Christians, and then in turn eat him. So it's I realize that's all a metaphor, but to an outsider it might seem very, very strange. I remember when I was living in Turkey. And they're Muslims. And, when they saw crosses hanging in a room, they just didn't get it. I mean, if this guy was a god, why would you crucify him? Why would you depict him in such a manner and not all-powerful? We're not alone in that, but it's an important idea just to keep in mind. And human sacrifices and dismemberment were part of their society. I remember when I was younger, this was looked upon with great criticism because it was thought that it was basically Europeans coming in and treating the local cultures as barbarians and having them, have these human dismemberment, sacrifices, and even cannibalism. But now appears true. It appears that this was all true. Here we get a story of Huitzilopochtli, springing from this woman, Kotleque's womb, as I said, fully armed. And he defends himself and his mother against his brothers and this character, Cholqui. And we see here, these are Spanish depictions of it. But once again, it's interesting that this battle and dismemberment are part of the religion. Look on the bottom right, on the top image here, and we see that body completely dismembered. Here we see this death deity again, and I've showed you this before. This was found in 1978, so pretty recently. That's right when I started college, and we have it painted here and reproduced. This thing is pretty large. I was sort of surprised when I saw it in the museum in Mexico City, and showing this dismemberment of this great female deity. So here was how it looked when it was found. That's a nice find, and so. And I know it's 1978 is a long time for you guys, but for me, I was just graduating from high school. So this is relatively recent in archaeology, and is once again this, another indication of just how new the research is in Mexico in comparison to Mesopotamia and Egypt. They would have a feast to this Panquetzalitzli, very difficult names, in which we see a depiction here of the people being sacrificed. I think I showed you the wonderful eccentrics before, these flint knives that were made specifically for extracting the heart out of the body. And the idea was to extract it fast. And the person would be sacrificed, and then his heart would be presented, and then thrown down these steps. And these would bring about, as I said, fertility of the produce. What this concept of sacrifice of humans is existing throughout. Once again, we cannot be too judgmental of them in light of European cultures doing this. And once again, I know I use the metaphor of Christ and being sacrificed, etc. And we and Christians weren't really sacrificing people, but the concept is out there, and it developed from previous practices. I just want to show you one of these Zompatlas, and here's a depiction on the upper left. This was actually, I think this one is at Mexico City, and showing a piece of artwork showing the skulls. On the right, one has been found with a whole bunch of skulls, we can see there. And then reconstructions on the lower left and on the lower right, one from one of the Spanish codices, showing how they were displayed. So, these were signs of power and signs that, the people in charge had a lot of control, and this is what can happen if you do something wrong. Here we see a reconstruction of one just found at Tenochtitlan, once again at Mexico City, where they had a whole bunch of racks and then towers of skulls stacked on them. Just think about this, just the amount of people killed in order to make this. And we can look at this as the East Tower was just discovered in 2020. So, there's new finds being made, and we're learning more and more about this. And let me show you. Sorry.